Are you ready to be empowered? Well, welcome to the Empower Freedom Podcast with your host, Marla Kopecki. Join me on a journey of self-discovery and empowerment for you and those who love and support with disabilities. We are empowering you, empowering those you love and support. Let's create a life that is full of freedom and joy and get started together. Hello and welcome back to Ability Awakening by Empower Freedom. As we transition in that back to school time, this week we were talking about our teachers and our paraprofessionals. As many of you are aware, I was a teacher for many years. I taught in a variety of different settings and I took on a lot of different roles in that back to school transition. I will share with you that as much as parents have transition concerns, so do teachers. And we want all of our kids to be really successful and to have the best back to school transition possible. So in this episode, I'm going to break down some strategies that I utilized as a teacher to promote communication with parents, to set the tone with my paraprofessionals and support staff, to connect with those related service providers, as well as transitioning as a whole with new students and new objectives and all things related to the back to school. All right, so you're in your summer and many of you may feel that sense of anxiety. I know when I was transitioning back to school every year, I would always it was excitement to get back and be a force for good and for change and growth. But it was also a time of anxiety because I was always concerned with how well I would be able to move forward with my students and how I could bring us together as that family in our classroom. And how I was going to foster all the communication and get all the things that a teacher does done. So there were some things that I set up to do. I made a checklist for myself that I utilized every year if I remained in the same role. So if I was in a support teacher role, I had a checklist of things I would do that needed to be done every year ahead of time. If I was in a teaching role, I had a checklist depending on if I had more of a self-contained style classroom where you went out for some classes, but you spent a lot of time in my classroom focusing on life skills and other things. Or if you are really that cross-categorical teacher where the kiddos are out amongst their peers, learning the same things as their peers, and you may do minutes or co-teach a class, whatever the model is that your district does and that you do. So know that I always started with a checklist and I always had it and I saved it from year to year if I remained in the same role. There are some things that I did regardless of where I was. I always did a welcome letter, not an email, a letter. Many of our families are still looking for that personal connection. And so I use that welcome letter to introduce all of the adults that would be supporting the loved one that would be in our classroom. Okay, so like when I had more of the self-contained where we went out for certain classes among our peers, but I really taught the literacy, the math, life skills, those classes. I would put in that letter a welcome, a little bit about me, and then a little bit about the pairs that I knew would be in the classroom, but I always put a note on there that the adults may change, okay? I always included a school supply list, whether it was cross-categorical or support or a self-contained style classroom. I noticed that my school supply list and the needs of the students varied from what the regular education and students needed. Reason being, I may have a organizational system that I use with my students to really promote those goals of executive functioning when I was in those cross-cut and in my self-contained. I may have additional hygiene when we're working on daily living skills, like things to brush your teeth, comb your hair. So we're practicing those in the classroom. So my school supply list was always different. So I always made sure that my letters were sent to my families prior to or as close to when the school supply list would head out to the families, because they would be shopping for their kiddos. And some would come to school with what the classes needed versus what our classroom would use. So I always included that. I included any medical release forms or medication forms in every letter. Reason being that what a lot of people don't realize is you need a release signed even for ibuprofen or Tylenol as needed. Any medication, cough drops, everything needs a release. So I always put that in the letter and sent it out to have that release to provide medication. So if your loved one is on a med or needs headache medicine or any type of cough syrup or anything, that's already filled out and they have a copy of that. So I'd always send that. I'd always have a field trip form in there as well. Now I know field trips have changed. So like the district I used to work for now went to an online format. So if that doesn't pertain to you, just disregard it. But I put a field trip form in there. If we were doing our community-based trips throughout the course of the year, we did one a month where we went out in the community and we worked on our community-based skills. I know at the high school level, they did one several a week. So we really did that transition in the middle school. So I'd always have something like that in there as well. And then I would send it off to the parents. Oh, and a get to know you. I forgot. A get to know you sheet. You will notice in my empower-freedom.org, one of the cool things that I have in there is a get to know you book. And what's in that you could send out to parents is a total get to know you about the child, which is fabulous because in there I have not only their siblings and their parents, but their favorite foods, their favorite shows, their favorite things. But also I have in there what reduces their anxiety, what stresses them out, so that you can have a knowledge and background from a parent's perspective on those things as well, along with the IEP. And if you've previously done observations, like I would generally observe my students when I was in a self-contained class prior to them coming to me. So I had an idea of how they operated within the school. Especially because my students at the time were coming in that big transition age I always talk about, from elementary where you're going from one class to now you're traveling between classes. That was a huge transition for a lot of students, more so than like middle to high, because middle to high you're transitioning between classes, but you've already had exposure to everything. Just it's a different building with more kids. So those going from early childhood to kindergarten and then elementary to middle are some of our biggest transition years. So I would always have in there what we need, and I would do those observations if I knew that I was going to be in that job next year. Another thing that is in there that's incredibly helpful is a get to know your school family. The reason that that's in there is, to the best of our knowledge, and we know teachers change. We know that. But if we can get a picture in what that person teaches, that helps alleviate that anxiety for many of our students. And it's just a book like, this is one of your regular education teachers. This is who I talk to about this. This is your physical therapist. You do anything gross motor with her. This is your adaptive physical education teacher. This is what you do with her or him, and all of those things, so that they have the background and the knowledge. So especially in those transition years, they're not surprised at who's coming in. So I would always do that. And both of those are linked in are already created for you in the empower-freedom.org. Another thing I would do is I'd set up my classroom for success. So that included visuals, that included behavior expectations. Again, you will notice that in my modules, or not, sorry, my membership, not my modules, my membership, that I already have a series of expectations that you can use as your own in your class, or you can modify it or get an idea of how to create a series of expectations. Because my first weeks of school, all we did is we went through routines and expectations. We went through boundaries. So I utilized things like floor tape. You'll notice that as well in the membership. I would have it outlined for my students on what was my personal space and what was their personal space, where they could have their things and where things needed to be cleaned. And we walked through every single expectation. Their lockers, I have a visual schedule in there of what goes in their locker or in their cubby. All of those things are provided for you there. And the reason that I would walk through and set that up and put those things in there and have that at the start of the year is when my students learn the routines and the expectations, their learning flourished because it created that sense of predictability that even if something unpredictable happened, because I had created that strong base, we were able to be flexible as the year went on. So many people would say, oh my gosh, Marley, your kiddos are walking down the hall by themselves without adults. They know where they're going. They know this, they know that. Like the expectations are very clear. And it's because I taught it and I retaught it and I retaught it. And I used curriculum to teach it as well. So a lot of times I didn't do a lot of grading at all in the first month. Reason being is that I was teaching the routine on how we did things. So if I had whole class instruction, I was teaching how we do whole class instruction. If I had individual work time, I was teaching how we do that with things that are enticing and motivating so that as we start diving into more and more of these tasks, they know the routine so that when the unexpected happens, we can move forward with the expected and cope with the unexpected and be flexible, because that's the other key, is being flexible. So when I was a teacher and I was doing my lesson plans, I always had a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, because you never know what's going to happen throughout the day. So those are just some of the tips that I did to get ready for the school year and how I transitioned into school by teaching what was expected over and over and over. That your classroom transition, your classroom family, all of those things will flourish. Okay. One more thing, and it's a very important thing. Communication with parents. So we talked about those books, right? And those transition books. The other note that I frequently did, and by frequently I meant daily, I would have the kiddos fill out an end of the day sheet, because so often, whether regular ed, whether special ed, doesn't matter, parents ask their kids, what did you do at school today? What did you learn? And especially in more significant classrooms, parents want to know more details so that they can follow up, follow through, or know how to handle the evening ahead. So in the membership, you will also notice communication forms to share with parents for the end of the day. There are ones that are strictly visual where you can use stampers. You can have kids circle however you want to have them indicate what classes they had for the day and a spot for you to write a note. There's also some in there that the kiddos get to fill out what they did in each class. It's really differentiated to meet each individual learner's needs so that they can be empowered to share with their parents what they did at school that day. So those are all things that I implemented, both to make the transition to school for the kiddos successful, as well as the transition for parents, so that we could all transition together to be successful throughout the school year. Again, we are here to empower you to empower those you love. Joining us today, as always, we look forward to your feedback and support. Go ahead and leave us a comment or a review. We really love those 5-star reviews on YouTube and our podcast platforms on Spotify. Podcast. If you're looking for more support, check out our empower-freedom.com to become a member or to enroll in our newsletter, where we're constantly giving out additional information and supports and those how-to supports and articles along with visuals. So, as always, empowering you to empower those you love.